One way of making your tracks more interesting and actually make them stand out from the crowd is actually with sound design. And with sound design, you can make something that is really standard and generic, like the lead from this track. Become a lot more interesting, like the lead from this track. The song that you've just listened to was signed to Sakura Music, and they told me personally that what made them sign the track was actually the sound design of the lead. I've been working with sound design for over 4 years now, and you probably may have seen a lot of recreations in this channel, like the ones from Tin Liquor, Artbot, Anima, and also Nora Impure. And I've also done many preset packs for Splice, freshly squeezed samples, and also production music live. And here are the top 5 things that I've learned over the years about sound design that can make your songs a lot more interesting and actually make your sound design stand out from the crowd. Let's go to Ableton and let's get started with this tutorial, shall we? So tip number 1 is that you have to start your sounds with presets and then you start tweaking them later. Most of the songs that I've been doing lately, I'm using presets that I've done for Abstrakt Music Lab and also for other companies as starting points. The main benefit of using presets is that you can quickly scroll through a lot of professional sounds, and then you can find the one that you like the most in less than 5 minutes, which is crucial, especially in the beginning of the song, because you don't want to kill the idea process, and you want to move there as fast as you can, as you may have seen in the last video. After you find the sound that you want, that's when you're going to start experimenting with the sound and changing a little bit of the settings in the preset. You may ask me, why should you do this? Well, a lot of people will use the same preset as the one that you're using right now. So a way that you can stand out more is if you change the preset a little bit and tweak a little bit of the settings and make it your own. But Leo, preset is cheating, and a lot of people say that to me. Well, I was recently talking to a friend of mine called On Boss, and he made a track called Move Your Body that has over 220 million plays on Spotify. And the main lead of the song was made using a preset. I'd be happy with that, wouldn't you? So start with presets to move fast, so this way you don't kill the idea. And then after you like the sound, start tweaking it to make it more of your own. However, be careful to not make it too close to someone else's sound. And that is tip number 2. Another reason why I definitely recommend you tweaking your presets is because you don't want to sound like someone else. And the way to stand out is actually by tweaking your preset and making them a little bit more of your own. The problem with many producers, especially beginner producers, is that they listen to a sound and they get so obsessed with that sound and they want to start copying it and using them on their tracks, but they end up sounding too much like what is already out there and not as creative as what is already out there. If you listen to melodic techno, how many times have you listened to a sound like this? 1,000 times, right? If someone is already doing this, doing the same combination of bass, drone shot, and anima shot will only make you sound like anima. And if I want to listen to something like anima, why not just listen to anima themselves? Therefore, how can you make this sound a bit different from what is already out there, so this way it doesn't sound too much like the others? In a recent newsletter post that I've done, and I asked what are labels actually looking for, what they answered to me was, don't sound like someone and put your creative touch in your music. So when you start using your presets, make sure to tweak them, but make sure to tweak them to something that is not so similar to what is already out there, so this way you can start standing out from the crowd. However, going to tip number 3, when starting to experiment, don't be so obvious and go nuts. The best way to start experimenting with the sound is actually by changing the main components of that preset. A couple of things that you can do to start changing it and make it a little bit more different are, for example, changing the amount of distortion, changing the length of the envelope, the modulations that it has, ways to start humanizing the sound, or even changing the octaves or the wavetables. Or you can go even bigger and start changing the midis to make it a bit different. For example, listen to the sound. And it's the same as what Anima does all the time, but now let's start tweaking it a little bit to make it a bit more different. So instead of a saw, let's use, for example, a square wave. Still sounds the same, but this oscillator B over here, it's modulating the wavetable A. What if we change over here the octave over here to 0? It starts changing the sound and starts to sound a little bit different, but let's put it over here to +7 in the semitones. It makes it even more different. And what if we also change over here the MIDI from this, we change it to something like this. So now let's compare. This is how it is in context. And this is how it was. Is it a similar sound? Yes, it's a similar sound, but now it's a variation of that vibe. It's a variation of that sound and not exactly what everyone else is doing. And this way you can start making your sound a little bit more unique. But, and let's go to tip number 4, the best way that you can do to start making your sounds more unique is starting to add movement to it with LFOs and automation. One of the things that I've seen most producers doing, especially the biggest producers, is having sounds that change over time and are not the same. And you can achieve this with LFOs or automation. Essentially, what you want to make is a sound that it's not the same thing in the whole length of the song. And at the same time, you want to make something that changes over time to make it a little bit more alive and a little bit more human. Listen to this, for example. Listen to the sound that we have. But listen to what happens when we apply LFO over here to the cutoff. Just a tiny bit like this. It already makes the sound a lot more alive and a little bit different from what is already out there. Not only this, but if we apply LFO over here to the reverb and possibly over here to the delay as well, we can even apply this to the distortion. It already changes the sound and makes it a lot more interesting and makes it a little bit more unique as well. But now let's change gears a little bit and let's listen to what Lee Youth did in his track Mirage. You can see that some sounds have a little bit more cutoff, some sounds have a little bit less cutoff, some sounds have a little bit more attack, some sounds have less attack. And by doing this, he makes the sound a lot more alive and a lot more human. And by making it more different over time, it becomes a little bit more interesting. And that is something that you can do to your basses as well. For example, listen to this bass over here without any automation. But listen how it sounds with a little bit more automation, and listen how more alive it sounds as well. It's more different, it's not the same over time, and then it becomes a little bit more interesting. But how can you do this and how can you apply this to your own tracks? Well, if you're using Ableton, you can use LFO over here, which is a plugin native from Ableton, and you can apply a random LFO as the one that I'm having over here, which is completely random. Or if you're using Serum, what you can do over here, you can go over here to your global and apply chaos to your sounds. So for example, you can go to the matrix, apply chaos 1 to the frequency fill over here in the filter, and also chaos 1 to the effects filter as well, which is this one over here, effects fill frec. Now we're gonna push this a lot more, and we're gonna disable this over here. Maybe less. We're achieving the same thing, we're making the sound a lot more different and a lot more interesting. But let's go to tip number 5, which is don't make your sound so different because otherwise it can end up being a bit too different. Make sure that you're also not so different from others. Otherwise, people will start feeling that the sound that you've created is a bit too disconnected from what they want to hear. Listen to what happens when we go a bit too high with that sine wave that we had over here in the bass that we created from Anima. But if we tweak the octave, it ends up sounding a bit weird and not creating the effect that we want, which is a bit too weird now and it becomes too different. What I love to say is that you have to think on the edge of the box and not outside of the box. You have to think of something that it's a bit common, but at the same time different enough to not be exactly as someone else. But how can we achieve this? Well, when you're going to a sound that is a bit different, ask your friends what they think about if they think that it's unique and if they think that it's not so different. This way you can make sure that your sound is still within this genre that you want to make, but at the same time different enough so it's not the same as everyone else is doing. And you may ask me, Leo, all of that is easy to you because you know sound design. And now let's go to tip number 6, which is you have to learn sound design to be able to tweak your presets the best way possible. When I started producing, I hated sound design. Capital letters, hated sound design. And that is because I wasn't good at it and I didn't want to learn it, essentially. But with sound design, as you've seen, you can do a lot of stuff and you can tweak your sound to make it more unique and actually find your characteristic sound. The best way to learn sound design is actually by making tutorials that you can find online. And you can find a bunch of tutorials that we've done also over here in our channel, over here in the top right corner. And the best way is simply doing all the presets that you can do, not only the presets in your genre, but also presets outside of your genre. What you want to achieve is you want to make sure that you understand synthesis, because learning how to do not only the sounds that you want, but also sounds that you think that you'll never use will expand your possibilities. And again, how will this help you? Well, by knowing sound design, you'll be able to tweak the presets and make them a little bit more unique and a little bit different from what everything else is happening in your genre. And by doing this, that's how you're going to stand out with sound design, and that's how you're going to make your sound more unique, and that's eventually how you're going to find your characteristic sound. And that's it. I hope you liked the video, and I hope to see you in the next Abstrakt video next week. Ciao.